Hello?
Hello, I'm your child and I'm in prison.
Why are you scamming me?
I had no intention of hurting him. Apparently I had beaten him to death with my fists.
And you have no memory
I
of it?
have no memory of it. No memory of it.
Before the news called him the Milwaukee Cannibal, before the headlines, the mugshots, the crime scene photos, there was a little boy, a boy born into a house full of pills, fighting, and secrets. A boy whose brain was soaked in chemicals before he ever took his first breath. A boy whose father dreamed of total control, and whose mother's body became a walking pharmacy. Was Jeffrey Dahmer born a monster, or was he engineered from birth? What if Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't a lone, inexplicable evil, but instead a casualty of an intelligence agency obsessed with breaking and reprogramming the human mind? Between the 1950s and the late 1970s, the CIA ran a network of experiments so disturbing and so wide-reaching that it would take congressional hearings and investigative journalists decades to uncover even fragments of the truth. MKUltra wasn't a single program. It was a web of over 150 sub-projects spread across universities, hospitals, prisons, pharmaceutical companies, military bases, and even psychiatric wards. It explored hypnosis, sensory deprivation, electroshock, drug-induced dissociation, the splitting of personalities, and trauma as a tool to reprogram human behavior. What remains of the official documents is a blurred outline of a government desperate to create a soldier who wouldn't remember, an assassin who wouldn't hesitate, and a civilian who could be influenced to do whatever they wanted without them ever realizing it. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented history. And it just so happens that Jeffrey Dahmer was born right in the middle of this era, at a time when universities were quietly partnering with intelligence agencies, when mind manipulation research was woven into medical schools, psychology departments, and chemical labs. His father, a young chemist studying at universities during the height of MKUltra's expansion. His mother, put on an extreme and suspiciously heavy drug regimen while pregnant. And what followed wasn't just a troubled childhood for Dahmer, but an infamous crime spree fueled by addiction, trauma, dissociation, missing memories, and unexplained protection from people who had every chance to stop him. When you look at his early medical history, his time in the army, the blackouts, the compulsions, the police protection, his own experiments, and even the cameras found in his apartment, it's hard not to ask a very obvious question. Was Dahmer just a product of a broken home and tragic circumstances, or was he a CIA asset unleashed on an unsuspecting community? Before we answer that question, we have to start from the beginning. May 21st, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer is born. For everyone watching, it looks like any other birth. A healthy baby, two young parents starting out in post-war America. But what's happening inside that tiny body is a different story. While Jeffrey is forming in the womb, his mother, Joyce, is reportedly taking up to 24 or more prescription pills a day. Sedatives, tranquilizers, pills for anxiety, pills for sleep, pills for mysterious episodes. She experiences strange, seizure-like fits, her body going rigid, eyes bulging and foaming from the mouth, moments where she locks up, trembles, and loses control.
She was taking quite a few different types of medication and many pills of the same type of medication, a lot of pills at the time, just before Jeff was born, in the last trimester. And while I was trying to search every possible reason why Jeff turned out the way he did, one of the things that crossed my mind, of course, was the effect of chemicals, biochemicals on the brain, and especially just before birth.
Being a student of chemistry at the time, and eventually getting his doctorate, Lionel would have known exactly what kind of chemical cocktail his wife was taking. And it should have been obvious to him, of all people, the kind of effects it could have on his unborn child. But Lionel always seemed to look the other way and only started asking these questions after Dahmer was caught. On paper, he's just a hard-working, slightly awkward science guy. But in his own words, buried in his book, there's another side. As a boy, Lionel experiments with hypnosis. He invites a neighborhood girl up to his room. He lights a candle and tells her to stare into the flame, to breathe deeply and close her eyes. He gives the commands, and she obeys. He feels a surge of power as she slips into a trance. He admits later that what thrilled him wasn't just the trick. It was the feeling of total control over another human being, turning a person into a puppet, a zombie, something that obeys. The mother, meanwhile, is being chemically subdued and managed with tranquilizers, sedatives, and who knows what else while she carries Jeffrey. A man obsessed with control, a woman drugged into submission, and in the middle, a baby's brain trying to form. After Jeffrey is born, the medical interventions don't stop. As a toddler, he's constantly sick. Ear infections, throat infections, endless trips to the university clinic, more injections, more needles, more chemicals. His father remembers the way Jeffrey's little body reacted, crying through the night, buttocks hardened with injection lumps, and fighting the nurses who kept poking him. Then, around age 4, things escalate. Jeff starts complaining about pain in his groin. The doctors diagnose a double hernia. He's put under general anesthesia, and an invasive surgery is performed. After that surgery, something in Jeffrey changes. The once energetic, outgoing little boy becomes quiet, withdrawn. He starts staring off into space, sitting motionless for long periods, lost somewhere far inside his own mind. While Jeffrey is quietly folding inward, the house around him is coming apart. His parents fight. A lot. Many retellings paint Lionel as the soft-spoken, long-suffering father, but the fuller picture isn't so gentle. There are shouting matches, doors slamming, physical altercations. Jeffrey finds an escape inside his own mind where his dark fantasies are already starting to form. As a child, dissociation becomes his hiding place, the same psychological fracture found in subjects of government-funded mind control experiments. Then something begins to grow inside of him, a curiosity that should have alarmed everyone around him. He starts collecting and dissecting dead animals. No one questions it. No one intervenes. In fact, Jeffrey is given everything he needs to hone his skills. A chemist father who understood acids, demonstrations of how to clean flesh from bone, bleaching techniques, safety equipment, chemical solutions in the garage, and scientific manuals.
Jeff said that it wasn't unusual for him to take squirrels and rabbits, dead dogs, and bring them home, use a knife to peel all the skin off of it, all the flesh off of it, use various different chemicals to bleach the bones, and then he'd set them out and dry them out, and then try to reconstruct it. And then actually had a little burial ground next to the side of his garage where it was marked what animal was buried in, each place. I find that bizarre. I mean, if my son was doing something like that, I'm sure I would have knocked him upside his head and told him to knock it off. For whatever reason, maybe the fact that his father was a chemist and was involved in chemicals, and the fact that Jeff took, interest in that was pleasing for his father. Like I'm pleased that my son has taken up criminal justice in college.
And right as Jeffrey begins experimenting with death, rumors emerge of another kind of violation. Some say he was abused by a neighborhood boy. Others claim Jeffrey confided that the abuse came from his own father. In government mind control experiments, they used sexual humiliation, exploitation, and assault to break young subjects because it created lifelong confusion between trauma and arousal, violence and pleasure. Dr. George Estabrooks, a hypnotist who worked with intelligence agencies in mind control experiments, wrote openly about trauma being used to break down the barriers of the conscious mind. Once that is achieved, hypnosis techniques can be used to create multiple personalities that are controlled independently. One personality could be programmed for operational use, while the host personality remains unaware. By the time Jeffrey Dahmer reaches his teenage years, his mind is already deeply fractured, and now that broken inner world begins showing itself. Jeffrey begins drinking. Heavily. By high school, he's showing up to class drunk, hiding liquor in a styrofoam cup he calls his medicine. Classmates remember the smell, the slurred speech, the checked-out stare. MK Ultra files show this same pattern in abused or fragmented subjects, self-medication to quiet the fracture, to blur the edges between identities, and to escape the parts of themselves they can't control. Meanwhile, Jeffrey's fixation on death intensifies. He keeps dissecting and collecting, constructing a small museum of death in his garage. A rehearsal for what would come later. Next, these morbid collections and experiments turned into ritual. Neighbors describe finding a dog in the woods, decapitated, its body and head deliberately positioned, almost like an offering.
Never really remember him, He was always at home and played by himself a lot.
Kibble, however, does remember a gruesome discovery he made 17 years ago while walking with his younger brother in a wooded area about a half-mile behind the Dahmer home.
I walked up and then I realized that it was a dog. That it was a pretty good-sized carcass, and it had been ripped open, gutted, all over, the guts hanging around, and decapitated, and the head was actually on a tree, like all in line. It was a real strange thing because there was a cross and the dog hanging, and then the head behind it on a tree, and then there was actually a path going down to little fires, like it looked like a devil worshiping or whatever they do. I remember taking a friend back then the next day, and we were taking pictures and things just to show some people because it was such a strange, we were going to try to see who was doing it, but never did do much about it. Actually stayed out of the woods.
Jeffrey later admitted it was him who put the dog's remains in the woods, although he denies actually killing the dog and claims he found it when it was already deceased.
The beagle that got hit. I wanted to see what the insides looked like, so just cut it open. It was already dead. And wanted to do, I guess, something shocking with it. So I took it and stuck it up on a pole in the neighbor's wooded area.
Around this time, Jeff also goes to prom with a fellow high school student named Bridget. She claims she ended the date abruptly when Jeff and his friends decided to hold a seance.
Bridget Geiger went to the Revere High School senior prom as Jeff Dahmer's date. She was a sophomore, he was a senior. The prom date went fine. Dahmer was quiet and polite. But later at his parents' house, where police have now found human bones buried in the backyard, Geiger says she ran for her life as Dahmer and her friends called a seance and tried to talk to Satan.
They decided to hold this seance, and I was brought up Catholic, and we were told you don't challenge the occult. I've always been brought up this way. You don't challenge things like this. We think they do exist, but you just don't mess around with them.
Geiger says the group went to a dark den in the house, gathered in a circle, and just as they thought they had made contact, Geiger was spooked.
And the candle, all of a sudden, it snapped and sparked and popped, and I don't recall it looking like anybody blew it out. I didn't like this. I'm like, find the lights. I'm out of here now. This is not funny if it's a joke. And I went and stood across the street. I don't know how long, and they said when they were done, they could come out and get me.
Prosecutors are not taking Dahmer's dabbling into the occult as a joke either. In fact, they do admit that they are investigating heavily because they want to find out not only what may have caused him to do this, but they also want to be prepared if there is a trial that Dahmer not enter any of this information, including the abuse information, as a defense.
After the seance, his interest in ritualism and the occult didn't disappear. Later, we will discuss the role it played in his crime spree. But around this same time, something unusual happened. Jeffrey took a school trip to Washington, D.C., and something happened that has no reasonable explanation. He went to a payphone called the White House and got permission to bring his classmates inside for a visit to the executive office building with the vice president at the time, Walter Mondale. There was no prior arrangement, no security screening done ahead of time, no teacher guiding the call, just Jeffrey making contact on his own. And no one has ever clarified how he obtained the number, why the call went through, or why the request was granted. Teenagers don't just call the White House from a payphone and get waved into the vice president's office. That doesn't happen without someone on the inside allowing it. If there's one detail that raises eyebrows more than any other, it's this one. It's the smoking gun that Dahmer had extensive government connections, even in his teenage years. After graduating high school in 1978, Dahmer's life unravels fast. He is living at the family home in Bath, Ohio, and his parents are divorcing. His dad isn't allowed at the house due to a protective order, and the mom abandons Jeffrey at the house and moves to Wisconsin with his younger brother. He's 18, isolated, drinking heavily, and now completely alone, and only 3 weeks after graduation, he kills his first victim, Stephen Hicks. Dahmer dismembers Hicks, packs the remains into plastic garbage bags, loads them into the back seat of a car, and drives toward a dump site. He's drunk and weaving all over the road. And then it happens. He gets pulled over. An officer walks up to the car. The window rolls down, and the officer immediately comments on the smell. The officer noticed the odor of decomposition, but instead of opening the bags, instead of calling it in, instead of following basic procedure, he lets Dahmer go with a warning. No search, no suspicion, no follow-up. He assumes the bags are just garbage, even though Dahmer was underage, visibly intoxicated, swerving across the road and driving with leaking trash bags in the back seat. Is this just beginner's luck? Or is this protection? Because this was only the first time the police effectively helped him slip away. It wouldn't be the last. This pattern repeats almost unbelievably throughout his entire timeline. Moving forward to the fall of that same year, his mother is still gone, his father is now remarried, and the family home is sold. Jeffrey enrolls at Ohio State University. But OSU has a history most people don't know about. It was one of the many universities named in connection with behavioral research programs during the MK Ultra era, a period when intelligence agencies quietly funneled money into psychology departments, medical labs, and student research studies. It wasn't the only school involved, but it's part of the larger map of institutions that hosted mind control-related experiments. Jeff didn't thrive there. He barely functioned. He showed up to classes drunk. He spent most days isolated in his dorm room, surrounded by empty bottles. The only course he passed was riflery, something he barely remembered later. He flunks out after only a single quarter, and instead of support or intervention, he's sent straight into the U.S. Army. Jeff begins with basic training at Fort McClellan, and from there he's transferred to Fort Sam Houston, one of the Army's key medical training centers. This is where he becomes a combat medic, learning how to sedate, how to treat trauma, how to manage blood loss, how to resuscitate, how to administer IVs and injections, and how the human body responds under stress. Skills that align almost perfectly with the techniques used later in his crimes. For someone who would go on to drug, sedate, and experiment on victims, the Army gave him a toolkit. Jeffrey is then stationed in Baumholder, West Germany, and his behavior becomes increasingly erratic. Reports of heavy drinking, allegations of sexual assault, memory gaps, and emotional instability. But despite his chronic alcohol abuse, multiple disciplinary problems, severe instability, complaints from fellow soldiers, and an inability to perform his duties, Jeffrey Dahmer was not court-martialed. He was not reprimanded. He was not medically separated. He was honorably discharged with full benefits. Most soldiers with a fraction of Dahmer's issues face administrative separation, not a clean record. Instead, Jeffrey is quietly and politely removed from the Army. But Dahmer isn't the only soldier with this strange profile. Gary Heidnik, another man who would go on to commit horrific medically oriented crimes, was also rejected from military police, sent to Fort Sam Houston, trained as a medic, deployed to West Germany, and honorably discharged against all odds. Heidnik was later connected to LSD experimentation within the Army. He would eventually claim he was drugged and experimented on during his service. The parallels between Heidnik and Dahmer are unnerving. Same training, same base, same deployment, similar patterns of dissociation, and a similar blend of sexuality and violence. And both men went on to commit crimes involving control, captivity, sedation, and experimentation on living bodies. After his honorable discharge, Jeffrey doesn't return to structure or stability. He spends a short period in Florida working at a sandwich shop, drinking heavily, and is homeless living on the beach. During this time, he happens to find a dead body in back of the sandwich shop he worked at. That's not suspicious at all. Eventually, he runs out of money and returns to his father's home in Ohio. After Jeffrey Dahmer returns to Ohio, the downward slide doesn't stop. He is arrested shortly after moving there in 1981. Jeff is found drunk and unruly, barely functional. He's fined and released. Lionel then sends his alcoholic son to Milwaukee to live with his grandmother. Jeff attends church, finds small jobs, keeps mostly to himself. In 1982, he's arrested again, this time for indecent exposure at the state fair. He's fined and released. In 1986, he's arrested for exposing himself in front of 2 teenage boys. Again, minimal consequences. This same year, Jeffrey begins drugging partners inside Milwaukee bathhouses, slipping sedatives into their drinks. At least 4 men report being drugged. 1 is hospitalized. The bathhouse management eventually catches on and bans him permanently. But the police? They don't investigate him. They don't stop him. No charges are filed. Soon after being banned from the bathhouses, Jeffrey's behavior escalates. He meets Stephen Twomey at a bar. They get a room at the Ambassador Hotel. Jeff claims he didn't plan to kill him. It was only going to be a casual hookup like he has done dozens of times before.
One time I brought this young man back to the hotel room, the Ambassador Hotel. Was just planning on drugging him and spending the night with him. I had no intention of hurting him. When I woke up in the morning, he had a broken rib here. Was heavily bruised. Apparently I had beaten him to death with my fists.
And you have no memory
I
of it?
have no memory of it. But that's what started the whole spree all over again.
Another dissociative blackout. He buys a suitcase, transports the body to his grandmother's basement, and dismembers it using the techniques he'd perfected since childhood. This initiates the beginning of his killing spree. While still living with his grandma, he kills James Dockstader, who is just 14 years old. No one notices. No one reports anything unusual. Months later, the pattern repeats with Richard Guerrero. Jeffrey uses the basement again, the same basement where he once dissected roadkill as a child. The house begins to develop a noticeable odor, a smell that neighbors, family members, and even visitors occasionally comment on. No one searches the basement. No one pushes past Jeffrey's explanations. No one checks on the constant late-night activity. Then comes another moment when Jeffrey should have been caught but wasn't. He brings home Ronald Flowers, who only agreed to come over so he could get help starting his car. Grandma wakes up when they walk through the door, yet Jeffrey continues to drug him with coffee and pills. From there, nobody really knows what happened. Ronald survives the ordeal, waking up later in the hospital unsure of how he got there. Did the grandma help to get Flowers out of the house? Did Jeff drive him to the hospital himself? You would think this would raise some red flags. It doesn't. Flowers reports the incident to the police, and as usual, they do nothing. His last victim at Grandma's house is Anthony Sears. It's the first time he preserves body parts intentionally, keeps a skull, and keeps organs in acetone. Dahmer even keeps the mummified head in a locked box and takes it to work with him every day. Just another red flag that everyone somehow overlooks. After this, he moves into apartment 213 at the Oxford Apartments. And with that privacy, the killings escalate rapidly. The rituals deepen, the dissociation sharpens, and the pattern that began in childhood, the experimentation, the control, the compartmentalization, takes on a new form. After moving in, Dahmer starts developing a routine. He drugs men before they can resist. He poses them for photographs. He experiments with chemical solutions. He preserves skulls and bones. The apartment becomes both a ritual space and a laboratory for his compulsions, almost as if he is programmed to do these things. In late 1988, Dahmer drugs and assaults a 13-year-old boy. He's arrested. He's charged. But instead of being put away, Jeffrey is given 1 year in a work release program, the ability to return home each night, permission to keep his apartment, and minimal supervision. His probation officer is supposed to be checking in on him at his apartment, yet this never happens. Even more disturbing, this victim's older brother is Konarak Synthosymphones. The boy police will later hand back to Dahmer in 1991. The system not only fails, it sets the stage for a tragedy that should never have been possible. Over the next 3 years, Dahmer kills repeatedly, following a tight psychological loop. Lure, drug, pose, photograph, experiment, preserve. His behavior becomes increasingly ritualistic, keeping skulls, boiling bones, arranging body parts symmetrically, returning to the same poses, rehearsing the same scenes, and planning an altar that he described as giving him power. Once in custody, Dahmer didn't deny the ritualistic element. He drew the altar he'd been planning, detailing where each skull and candle would be placed. This was also described at length at his trial and through his own words in interviews.
After the fifth killing, he began to experience various bizarre beliefs which influenced his behavior. One of which was that of making a, quote, temple, end quote, or, quote, power center, end quote, with skeletons and skulls, hoping it would be, quote, be a means to get in contact with spirits that would aid me in getting power, to magically give me abilities and talents that I did not have, end quote.
If I couldn't keep them there with me whole, at least I felt that I could keep their skeletons. And I even went so far as planning on setting up an altar with the 10 different skulls and skeletons.
And what was the purpose of the altar going to be?
As a sort of memorial. A point where I could, I don't know, it's so bizarre and strange, it's hard to describe. A place where I could collect my thoughts and feed my obsession.
Ritual isn't just a strange footnote in Dahmer's story. It's a recurring theme that aligns with patterns documented in real mind control research. CIA-funded psychologists studied how symbols, repeated actions, sensory extremes, and ritual structures could shape behavior, fracture identity, or create altered states. They found that ritual focuses the mind, disrupts normal thought patterns, creates trance-like states, allows repeated exposure to trauma to stick more deeply, and builds alternate identities around symbolic meaning. Dahmer also started relying on priming behaviors, psychological triggers that helped him slip into a different state of mind. Techniques similar to what MKUltra researchers explored for identity shifting and dissociative control. One of the most revealing examples is Dahmer's obsession with The Exorcist 3. Before several killings, he played the movie on a loop, not as entertainment, but as preparation, as if the film helped him quiet one part of himself and amplify another. It's worth noting that the writer and director of The Exorcist 3, William Peter Blatty, once headed the U.S. Air Force's Psychological Warfare Division. The fact that this is the very film Dahmer used to dissociate and prime himself before killing is quite the coincidence. Tracy Edwards, the man who escaped Dahmer's apartment, which ultimately led to his arrest, testified about how this movie seemed to affect Jeffrey.
There was an Exorcist movie on. You know which one of them?
In fact, I know
the name, I'm not sure. I think it's three. I'm not sure which one. At times he would go through like different changes with me, you know.
Tell us about that.
One minute he's like nice, and then he was telling he didn't want people to leave him or abandon him, things of this nature, you know.
He told me that he's
well, what did you think about him as a person? What impression was made on your mind of this fellow that you're dealing with here?
Yeah, that at times he wasn't himself, and then at times he was like a nice guy, you know. He would come and go different times, you know, throughout the whole time. Then he would like sit being quiet at times, watching the movie, wanting me to watch the movie, you know, and just doing little chanting sounds, you know.
Did you observe him watching the movie and how he would react to the movie?
Right, he would like just start rocking back and forth when he, you know, certain parts of the movie or whatever.
And you have to say, what did he say, madam?
He was like chanting in certain times and rocking back and forth, right?
Tell us about his chanting. What was that all about?
I'm not even sure, sir, but it was just like, I can't tell you the words. I couldn't understand what he was saying at that time.
Can you mimic him? How it sounded?
It was like a slow slur, like some of that nature, some close like that, I'm not sure.
Did it keep on for a period of time?
Off and on throughout the ordeal.
And how about the movement back and forth? How was that being effectuated?
Just like back and forth, he would do it every now and then.
Just as you are rocking in your chair?
Like this.
And chanting?
And chanting.
Was there any parts of the movie that was going on that you saw that he said anything about?
It was like the part about the preacher. There used to be a preacher that had got possessed, and that it would seem like he was like interested in that part. That part had his attention more than anything. You know?
So tell us about what you mean by that. What impressions were made upon your mind when this was going on as to had his attention? How did he appear to you?
It appeared like it was like he wanted to mimic it or be like that part, you know, being demonized or whatever in that nature.
I'm sorry, I missed
Yeah, like he wanted that type of movie, that part, certain parts of that part interested him. You know, it was like he changed with it.
But it wasn't just the Exorcist movie that helped him shift personalities. There were also the yellow contact lenses, reptilian, inhuman, deliberately chosen to help him become someone else. Dahmer admitted the contacts made him feel more dominant, more powerful, more aligned with the version of himself that carried out the murders.
He began relating to parts of movies that seemed to suggest that there were evil forces out there.
Return of the Jedi was one of them. He really identified with the Emperor. He wanted like that mind control. He had those, you know, yellow eyes. So Jeff actually found some place where he could get contacts that were yellow eyes. And so before he would go out at night, he would put the contacts in. He had to get himself charged up by trying to emulate a devil or evil person.
In testimonies from survivors of MKUltra-style mind control experiments, victims explain how handlers would often imprint their fractured minds with symbols and stories from movies such as The Wizard of Oz, Snow White, and Alice in Wonderland to encourage their obedience and build the altered personalities. If put in this perspective, it starts to make a lot more sense why Dahmer used these Hollywood stories and symbols to detach and do what his core personality couldn't. Perhaps it was what he was literally programmed to do. And what he did next only strengthens that idea. Because Dahmer didn't just kill, he experimented. He began trying to engineer obedience, attempting to create victims who were alive but permanently compliant. He drilled into skulls, injected acid and boiling water into the brain, not for torture, but to erase consciousness, memory, resistance. These attempts echo the exact objectives documented in MK Ultra subprojects decades earlier: chemically altering behavior, destroying memory, inducing dissociation, and creating a submissive, programmable state. The government tried it in labs. Dahmer tried it in apartment 213. But Dahmer's experiments weren't carried out in secrecy forever. Eventually, one of his victims escaped, drugged, bleeding, and barely conscious. And what followed wasn't incompetence. It seems intentional. As if the police weren't stopping Dahmer, but safeguarding him. Konarak Synthesomphone, just 14 years old, managed to stumble out of Dahmer's apartment after a hole was drilled into his skull in an attempt to make him a living zombie. Neighbors immediately saw something was terribly wrong. They called 911. They begged police to intervene. These are two of the 911 phone calls made that night.
Okay, hi. I'm on 25th and State, and this is young man. He is butt naked. He has been beaten up. He is very bruised up. He can't stand. He's study falling out. He is butt naked. He has no clothes on. He was really hurt. And I ain't got no quarter on him. I just seen him, and he needs some help.
Where is he at?
On 25th and State, the corner of 25th and State.
He's just on the corner of the street?
Yeah, he in the middle of the street. He fell out. We trying to help him. Some people trying to help him.
Okay, and he's unconscious right now?
He get him up. He is bruised up. Somebody must have jumped on him and stripped him or whatever.
When police arrive at the scene, they find Konarak naked, bleeding, disoriented, unable to speak, barely able to stand. Dahmer walks up on the scene at the same time, claiming it's his drunk boyfriend. The neighbors pleaded not to let the boy go with Jeffrey. They told them he was a child. They told them he needed medical help. And yet, despite the blood, despite the witnesses, despite the obvious signs that something was horribly wrong, they returned Konarak to Dahmer. They even helped carry him back into his apartment. The apartment where just 2 days earlier, Dahmer killed Tony Hughes and his lifeless body was still laying on the bedroom floor. The officers stepped inside. They smelled the odor. They saw the state of the apartment, and they left.
Yes, there was a squad car, number 68, that was flagged down earlier this evening, about 15 minutes ago.
That was me.
Yeah, what happened, I mean, my daughter and my niece witnessed what was going on. Was anything done about the situation? Did you need their names or information or anything from them?
No, not at all.
You don't?
No. There's a intoxicated boyfriend of another boyfriend.
Well, how old was this child?
It wasn't a child, it was an adult.
Are you sure?
Yep.
Are you positive? Because this child doesn't even speak English. My daughter had, dealt with him before, seen him on the street, catching earthworms.
Yeah, no, it's all taken care of, ma'am.
Are you sure?
Ma'am, I can't make it any more clear. It's all taken care of. That's, he's with his boyfriend and his boyfriend's apartment where he's got his belongings also.
But I mean, isn't this, what if he's a child and not an adult? Are you positive this is an adult?
Ma'am, like I explained to you, it's all taken care of. It's as positive as I can be.
Oh, I see.
Okay, I can't do anything about somebody's sexual preferences in life.
Well, no, I'm not saying anything about that, but it appeared to have been a child. This is my concern. No,
he's not.
He's not a child.
No, he's not.
Within minutes, Dahmer administered another injection into his brain, and Konarak was dead. At this point, it looks less like incompetence by the police department and more like it was about protection. Because the police didn't just overlook the danger, they placed Konarak back into Dahmer's hands, as if ensuring the outcome rather than preventing it. What ultimately ended the spree was not police procedure, not investigative work, and not the growing number of missing persons around Milwaukee. It was a man who managed to stay alive long enough to run. On July 22, 1991, Dahmer offered 32-year-old Tracy Edwards money to come back to his apartment. Dahmer first tried to drug Edwards, and then tried using force to restrain him with handcuffs. Edwards managed to avoid these attempts. When Dahmer's attention broke for just a moment, Edwards seized his chance. He struck Dahmer. He ran. He burst out the front door and sprinted down the street, handcuffs still attached, until he found 2 officers on patrol. According to Tracy Edwards, the police, once again, were ready to let Dahmer slip free.
Introduce yourself. Yes, this is S.A. Salat. I'm the attorney representing Mr. Tracy Edwards in this action against the city of Milwaukee. At that point in time, when Tracy ran down the stairs, the officers were parked on the street. He sought their help. They denied him that help. They forced Mr. Edwards to walk back up to the apartment. After ridiculing him, asking him, who did you know? Which one of us did you escape from? Because he had a handcuff on. What are you, some type of homosexual in this area? He said, no, my life was just about to be taken upstairs. They said, well, go up there and tell him to take the handcuffs off. He walks upstairs by himself, no assistance from the Milwaukee Police Department, knocks on the door, Dahmer's opened the door and said, come in. I'll take the handcuffs off. Mr. Edwards, in fear again, runs back downstairs, tells the officer he won't take the handcuffs off. He wants me to come back in. I cannot go back in there. He would kill me. And at that time, then only one officer come upstairs to seek to give him some assistance.
Yet again, we have very unusual behavior from the Milwaukee police, only sending 1 officer back up to the apartment. It was almost as if they didn't want too many eyes going up those stairs. But the moment other officers decided to come up, only then did everything fall apart.
There's something incredibly fucking weird about this. There's something really weird about this. That there's no way that each one of those police was in on the fucking MK Ultra higher direct, following orders from a higher director within the CIA, you know, and so forth. And you got to remember, this guy, he got permission to go into the White House like no problem. So this is even above the president. The president is actually quite a low-level public office. If you really know your shit. Who the fucking president is doesn't matter. It's just a patsy. He's a fucking patsy and a bunch of psychological spell casting. That's all that it is. So what this reveals is that the Milwaukee police, their culture there, the culture, is geared towards operating within the parameters of the MK Ultra cult. Police culture there was geared towards, by default, operating under the parameters of the MK Ultra cult leadership.
For Dahmer. Only then did
these officers weren't deliberately helping Dahmer. It was automatic because of the culture, the police culture there.
The apartment finally give up its secrets. When the second officer walked into the bedroom, he looked inside an open drawer, and inside were Polaroids, images of bodies dismembered in the same room he was standing in. The officer froze and said the words that ended the spree. These are real. Dahmer was finally caught. They handcuffed him and took him down to the Milwaukee police station. But in later interviews, Dahmer claims he had completely disassociated during those moments, drifting into the same mental fog he described so often, leaving him with almost no memory of the night he was arrested.
It was the night of the arrest. I have no memory of what happened during the 6 hours before the last victim ran out of the apartment. I heard a knock on the door, and the police were there with the last victim. They asked me where the key was to the handcuffs. My mind was in a haze. I sort of pointed to the bedroom, and that's where they found the pictures, and they yelled, "Cuff him."
Once Dahmer was brought into custody, detectives sat him down for what would become over 60 hours of interviews. Yet not a single minute of Dahmer's confession was recorded. No audio, no video, nothing. This is despite the fact that recording interrogations was standard protocol at the time, especially in a case involving multiple homicides. But for Jeffrey Dahmer, the biggest serial case in Milwaukee's history, detectives chose to rely solely on handwritten notes, selectively chosen, filtered, and summarized hours after the conversations happened. This alone should raise every possible red flag. His confession depended entirely on what those detectives remembered or claimed to remember about what Dahmer said. And Dahmer's own memory? It was barely functioning at all. Meanwhile, back at apartment 213, investigators were cataloging an enormous amount of equipment, chemicals, security devices, and electronics, far more elaborate and expensive than what most documentaries mention. And among what was cataloged is a wall-mounted video camera pointing directly into the living room, exactly where most victims were photographed, drugged, posed, and eventually murdered. Dahmer told investigators it was just a dummy camera, something he bought to scare people into thinking they were being recorded, but that doesn't line up with what Detective Patrick Kennedy later revealed. Kennedy said the camera was real. He said it was a functioning mounted recording device, but it was simply not hooked up at the time of the arrest. And that raises the possibility that Dahmer's apartment wasn't just a crime scene, but a production studio. Before anyone had even imagined the dark web, underground networks were moving extreme material through secret exchanges. If that video camera was indeed recording what Dahmer was doing, then the question becomes, who else was watching? Was Dahmer only making recordings for himself? If so, where did the tapes go? Was Dahmer selling black market videos to fund his operations? Or was he part of something bigger? Even he didn't fully understand. For a barely functional alcoholic who could hardly hold down his job at the chocolate factory, Dahmer somehow maintained a steady flow of expensive tools, chemicals, and specialized equipment. Where did the money come from? The answer may be tied to that camera on the wall. By January 1992, Dahmer entered a plea of guilty but insane, removing the question of whether he committed the crimes and leaving only one question for the jury. Was he in control of his mind when he did it? Two competing psychological teams battled it out. The state argued Dahmer was methodical, calculated, and fully aware of his actions. The defense pointed to his dissociation, memory gaps, ritualistic behaviors, and the near-complete fragmentation of his identity. After only 5 hours of deliberation, the jury declared him legally sane. Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms. Dahmer was sent to the Columbia Correctional Institution, where officials immediately placed him in solitary confinement. Here, he expressed his desire to become a Christian and requested to be baptized. That baptism took place on May 10, 1994, and the exact same day Dahmer was baptized. John Wayne Gacy, another prolific serial killer with ties to the government, was executed by lethal injection. As one man was baptized and another executed, the sun itself vanished for a moment in a rare solar eclipse. It's as if the universe, or something else, was closing a chapter. Eventually, despite warnings from staff, Dahmer was released into general population, where he was considered a model inmate. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer, Jesse Anderson, and inmate Christopher Scarver were assigned to clean the prison gym area. For reasons no one has ever been able to explain, the supervising guards left all three men unsupervised for nearly 20 minutes, a clear violation of protocol. Within that unguarded window, Christopher Scarver attacked Dahmer with a metal bar. He was pronounced dead shortly after. A panel later ruled there was no conspiracy, though multiple guards were suspended. Many remain unconvinced. Dahmer's body was cremated. His possessions were later auctioned off and immediately destroyed. His brother disappeared into anonymity. His former apartment building was demolished entirely, a full erasure of the physical remnants of the case. Jeffrey Dahmer's death didn't just end a life. It ended a line of questioning that was only beginning to form. His death prevented any further interrogation about the contradictions in his confession, any federal review of how badly the Milwaukee police mishandled the case, any psychiatric reevaluation of his dissociation, amnesia, and fractured identity, any testimony about the events in his childhood he repeatedly alluded to but could never fully express, any reopening of cases, records, or evidence that were sealed, destroyed, or quietly filed away. The case ended exactly where it needed to for the official narrative to remain intact. When most people think of Jeffrey Dahmer, they picture a closed case. One man, one apartment, one horrific story. But when you look closer, the simplicity falls apart. You don't have to believe Dahmer was part of a larger network. You don't have to believe he was shaped by trauma-based conditioning. You don't have to believe he was an asset for an intelligence agency. You only have to admit that the case does not fit the story we've been given. But if you are open to the possibility that Dahmer was more than just an isolated killer, that he may have been, willingly or not, an asset in a much larger system, then you might be asking yourself, why? Why would a government engineer and unleash such a horrific monster onto the world? Historically, programs like MK Ultra proved that certain agencies were willing to push human psychology past its limits in the name of research, no matter the cost. If you follow that line of thinking, several explanations begin to appear. 1. To create fear, instability, and social fragmentation. Government programs throughout history have exploited fear as a tool. Chaos breaks down trust in police, local government, neighborhood cohesion, and minority communities. A community in fear is easier to influence and easier to surveil. 2. To observe real-world reactions to controlled horror. MK Ultra wasn't just about individuals, it was about population behavior. Releasing a psychologically fragmented subject into the public allows the researchers to measure how quickly fear spreads, how institutions fail or respond, how the media shapes a narrative, and what communities do when they feel abandoned. It becomes a live experiment in human behavior scaled up from a lab to an entire city. 3. To exploit the vulnerable populations. Dahmer's victims were young, marginalized, often impoverished men of color and gay teens who society routinely ignored. These are the populations that intelligence agencies have historically targeted when they want minimal public outcry, minimal investigation, and maximum deniability. If someone wanted to test the limits of human behavior or trauma-based manipulation, choosing victims the system already overlooked would guarantee the experiment remained invisible, at least for a time. 4. To generate blackmail or underground material. If the mounted camera was ever meant to record more than Dahmer admitted, then the value wouldn't just be in the footage, it would be in the authenticity. Real victims, real crimes, real horror. Material created in a live environment carries a different weight, and in black market or intelligence contexts, that weight can be leveraged for coercion, funding, psychological operations, compromat, and underground trade. A controlled asset in the field produces content far more valuable than anything manufactured in a lab. 5. Because real-world testing cannot be replicated in a lab. If someone wanted to study dissociation under stress, behavioral fragmentation, victim compliance, predator psychology, and community trauma, you cannot simulate that in a controlled clinical environment. You can only observe it in public, with real stakes and real consequences. And Milwaukee, ignored, underfunded, and divided, created the perfect laboratory. In the end, we may never know exactly what Jeffrey Dahmer was, but when you study this case long enough, you start to realize the horror wasn't just in apartment 213. It was in every moment someone could have stopped him and didn't. It was in every procedure that mysteriously wasn't followed. It was in every institutional blind spot that somehow aligned perfectly to keep one of the most unstable men in America on the streets. This was never just a story about one man. It's a story about a system that left him running unchecked. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please like the video, share it around, and subscribe for the next one. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. Thanks for watching.
All right. So this is some extremely serious shit. What the fuck is going on here? It's not capturing. When did it stop capturing my fucking screen? Oh, this is so weird. What the hell is going on here? I don't even have that window open anymore. This is so weird. Freaking image is frozen on the screen here. Okay, there we go. Like, I don't know what the fuck was going on there with that. So, this is super weird. And clearly, Jeffrey Dahmer was a product of, a massive experiment with massive ramifications. And so he's not the only person walking around with that shit in his head. Think about it. Born in a environment that instantly traumatized him, formed from drugs. If you watch, they put his mom on drugs, so he was born traumatized and on drugs. This is the psychonation. This is the psychonation that this guy was talking about. Michio Kushi. He was talking about psychonation, how in the future people would be conditioned through drugs and electronics. And he wasn't bullshitting. What I can't really say for certain why the CIA would want to produce people like Jeffrey Dahmer. From what he said, it's mostly it's an attempt for people to save themselves from the effects of their bad decision making. And they can't return to spirit, and they can't harmonize with the earth. So they have to start invoking this crazy technology and these crazy manipulations to delay the effects, to delay their own self-destruction. This is because society is ruled by psychopaths, by narcissistic psychopaths. They run everything. They run MK Ultra, they run the government, they run the police. And that's why these forces operate in concert with one another. So there's probably millions of men like Jeffrey Dahmer walking around out there. Over time, because this problem hasn't been solved. So what happens to problems that don't get solved? They multiply. This is why we need people on the inside to affect change. Spiritual evolution is an inside job. And people like Jeffrey Dahmer are produced from the outside. From the outside in. Buddhas are made from the inside out. Think about that.